My father and my wife confessed they were together before I met her when I walked in on them spending time together, but now they're offering me a crazy deal to keep the peace. I left work early because the system was down, and they said I'd be out for the rest of the day. That's a really good situation, because you have an excuse to leave work early. The news was marred by what happened next. Afterward, I picked up takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant, planning to surprise my wife with lunch. We've been married for 2 years, and a couple for much longer, so my goal was to take advantage of the free time to spend more time with her. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, my plans began to unravel. My dad's car was parked a few doors down, and he'd only brought food for two. I knew it was his because he'd recently polished it and kept it obsessively clean. At first, I thought maybe he'd stopped by to drop something off, but the engine was off. There was no sign of him. When I walked into the house, everything was a little quieter than usual. The television was on, but the volume was barely audible. My wife wasn't in the living room. There were 2 coffee cups on the table, both half full. I went upstairs and started hearing their whispered voices, his voice and my dad's. My mind was already thinking about the scenario, but I hoped it wasn't real. I opened the door, and there they were. They weren't having sex, but it was intimate. Nice, yes, if you didn't know that was my wife, and the other person was my father. With that information, it was hard not to throw up. They were sitting close on the bed, gazing into each other's eyes, hands clasped, foreheads touching as if in a slow, tender embrace. But they weren't surprised when I opened the door. They were very calm. Instead, my dad slowly stood up and said, "We need to sit down and talk." I followed him into the dining room as if I were sleepwalking. My bag and lunch were still in my hands. My wife started. She said what she'd seen wasn't what it seemed, but that she owed me honesty. She admitted that she and my dad had known each other long before I met her. They had been friends, very close friends in her words. According to her, they shared a complicated past and had never had any real closure. I asked if they were having an affair. My dad looked me in the eye and said it was more than that. She said they had an emotional connection that never went away, and over time, they realized they were still in love. No one yelled that it was a joke and that I had fallen for it, even though I expected it. But then my wife added that they didn't mean to hurt me, and that was the worst part, because they said it in such a way as if they cared about me. My dad said this didn't have to become a disaster, that we were all adults and could come up with a mature solution. I asked what kind of solution he was suggesting, and my wife said we should consider staying legally married, but living separate lives under the same roof. That way there wouldn't be a messy divorce or a family dispute. We could keep the peace. He even presented it as a victory for everyone. I'd be free to date other people. She would eventually move out, and we could figure out how to divide things slowly, privately, without shame, without scandal, without drama, just a smooth transition. I asked if they had gone crazy, or if I was the crazy one imagining all this. My wife had the nerve to take my hand and say that she still cared deeply about me, just not in that way anymore. She said she didn't want to lose me completely, that I meant too much to her. She even said she thought we could redefine our relationship because it didn't have to be black and white. In case you didn't understand, she wanted to keep using me while she slept with other men, and if that wasn't bad enough, that man was my father. I got up and walked out the door without even grabbing my keys. I walked so far my feet hurt, but I couldn't stop because it made me think more. I ended up at a park near my office and sat on a bench. I didn't return home that night. I stayed at my friend Lucas's house and told him everything. At first, he thought I was lying. Because, of course, you tell him all this, and he replies, "I think you're joking, your father." Then he realized I wasn't joking because his face was so long, and he asked me what I was going to do. I told him I was getting a divorce, that I didn't know what this nonsense was, but that I wasn't going to be a part of any of it. But it's one thing to be determined, and quite another to be okay with it. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Maybe I'd been a fool, or maybe I just trusted the wrong people, but I wasn't going to do it anymore. On the third night, I decided I had to start moving the pieces. I called a lawyer, because whatever they thought they had, whatever they wanted to preserve, they were going to learn what real consequences were. They wanted peace within their families. I was going to give them a nasty divorce and have the family find out everything. I didn't answer their calls or texts for a week. I stayed with Lucas the whole time. Most days, I just sat on his back porch, staring at the poorly maintained yard, philosophizing about my own life and everything that had happened. I also went to work like a zombie, but then I stopped wasting time philosophizing and decided to fix his garden. It sounds silly, but the distraction alone made me feel better, and it was my way of thanking him for letting me stay there. On the 8th day, I finally responded, telling them I'd go pick up some of my things, and that I didn't want to have a conversation. I just wanted some space to get my things out, and for them to say absolutely nothing to me. That seemed to send them into panic mode, because suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My wife sent me a long text about how hurt she was that I hadn't given her a chance to explain herself. He said he understood my anger, but insisted that what they were proposing was the most compassionate option for everyone. Compassionate was the option of getting a divorce and ending their stupidity once and for all. They were deceiving me, and they wanted me to be compassionate. When I finally returned, I took Lucas with me just in case. I didn't trust myself enough to be alone in that house if my compassion ran out. My dad had a way of making me feel small, even when I wasn't doing anything wrong. And my wife, well, she had her own talent for making betrayal seem like a misunderstanding. The moment I walked through the door, it was like walking onto a stage. My wife had cleaned the entire house from top to bottom, even baking cookies to make the house smell better and have something to offer me. My dad was sitting in the chair, looking annoyed. My wife asked if we could talk, and I told her I wasn't there for a chat, just to pick up some documents and some essentials. But of course, they couldn't help it. My dad stood up and started telling me to stop behaving like that, because they had been nothing but kind to tell me things up front instead of letting me find out later. What a great father. They waited for me that day to tell me the whole truth. And if that day came later, it's not every day that the system crashes. How was he going to kill time until I arrived? He said he didn't expect to fall in love with her again, and that it had been complicated and painful for him too. He said he still wanted me in his life and hoped I would consider his proposal. His proposal was to sleep with my wife at my house, where I would be living, and that I would be okay with that. My wife intervened, talking about how this arrangement didn't have to change our legal status immediately, and that we could avoid expensive lawyers and public messes if we simply remained civil and respected each other's boundaries. He said we would live our truth, and that was something to be proud of. Lucas laughed out loud at that moment. He had tried some of my wife's cookies. Then she told me when we got back to her house, she had to do something. She wasn't going to let them do all that to you and keep all the cookies. It made me laugh for the first time in 10 days. I walked past them, grabbed the folder I needed from the office, and packed a small bag with clothes and toiletries. My wife followed me from room to room, trying to explain. She said yes, it was wrong, but that feelings weren't always convenient. She said she didn't want to lose me, that I still mattered to her. I told her she has strange ways of showing how important people are to her. I also casually mentioned, as if it were no big deal yelling, that I wasn't going to sit with them at lunch and play happy family, only for them to go have sex while I watched TV in the living room. That the very idea disgusted me, and if that happened, I'd throw up all over them, because yes, in my head, there would be lasagna for that lunch. Don't ask me why. She told me I was disgusting and an animal, but they were the animals, having sex with the couple's father and stuff like that. Although I think animals should have more common sense than them. Then I left as quickly as I could, and Lucas took the rest of the cookies and put them in his pocket. Then he dropped them off at a shelter on the way home. That night, Lucas and I went to a bar. He needed something stronger than coffee and busier than his living room. We talked about the divorce and that it was time to move things along. He asked me if I was going to tell the whole family, and the answer was yes, except that I'd been on autopilot the last few days and hadn't given it much thought. I especially had to tell my mother. When we got to her house, she had 2 new messages waiting for me, one from my wife and one from my dad. It was more nonsense that I didn't even bother to answer. Now I have to think about other things, which will distract me from all this. I have to talk to my mother about my father. Even though they're divorced, I don't know how interested they would be in knowing about this. I don't know how long this romance lasted. Update 1. I didn't block them after that night's post. I wanted to have a complete record in case I needed it later. My lawyer said it would be good to have messages from them admitting what was going on. The worst part was pretending in front of others. I hadn't told my mom yet. She and my dad divorced over a decade ago. She was finally happy with her life. The last thing I wanted was to drag her back into his mess. But the longer I stayed silent, the more it ate away at me. It all came to a head at a family dinner 2 weeks later. It was one of those informal Sunday get-togethers my aunt organized, potluck style. Half the family catching up while the kids ran and screamed. I almost skipped it, but then I thought, why should I miss out? I hadn't done anything wrong. I arrived with a store-bought cake because I didn't have the energy to cook. Everything seemed normal until I saw them. My father was already there. And sitting next to him, she was there too. I almost turned around and walked away, but I said, screw it, they're not going to have it easy. If this was the game they were playing, it was time to put things on the table. I went straight to the table, pulled out a chair across from them, and said I was surprised to see them both here. My dad smiled as if we were catching up over coffee. He said he thought it was time to be honest with the family, and that transparency would help everyone move forward. My wife just stood there, as if unsure whether she should speak, so I did it for them. I stood up, looked around, and told the whole table that I'd caught them cheating on me. I said my dad and my wife had been together behind my back for who knows how long. I said they proposed a deal. A deal where I'd remain legally married and let them pursue their relationship, while I pretended not to know anything to keep the family peace. Fortunately, my mom wasn't there that night. I'd rather have the talk with her than have her find out this way. My dad tried to intervene and say I was misrepresenting things. He said he and my wife had reconnected emotionally and hadn't meant to hurt me, but that adults should be able to handle mature relationships. I interrupted and asked, what kind of mature relationship involves sneaking around and sleeping with your son's wife? One of my uncles asked my wife if that was true. She just nodded and mumbled something about how things got complicated. Complicated is that you forgot to pay the electric bill, didn't fall on the mini father-in-law and said, we reconnected emotionally. And those were my words in front of everyone. I left after that because I knew my father had something to say. I didn't wait to see who stayed at the table with him or who left. I thought people would make their own decisions, and I wasn't going to beg them to take sides. The consequences came in waves. Some family members called and texted me that same night, saying they couldn't believe it. The family's balance is pretty good, and I don't think anyone is supporting my father's foolishness at the moment. My dad sent me another long text the next morning, saying that it was wrong of me to refer to my wife the way I did, that she was my wife, and I owed her respect. I was going to record my laughter. It was the second time in a long time I'd laughed, and sent it to him, but I didn't. My wife, for her part, sent me a shorter message. She said she was sorry things had to be this way, and she hoped I would someday understand how difficult it had been for her to choose between two people she loved. I gave my lawyer permission to get the wheels turning. He warned me it could get complicated, since we hadn't been married long and didn't have a prenuptial agreement. I told him I was ready for a fight. Deep down, though, I just wanted my name off the papers. I wanted my life back. I've already spoken to my mother, and although she was completely horrified, I think she was more horrified for me than for her. Update 2. The flying monkeys from my father and wife started arriving. My uncle, my father's brother, was defending my father. Not openly, but it's not the stance of someone who knows his brother was sleeping with his son's wife. He said his house wasn't the place for what I did, and that I disrespected him for doing that. He ended by saying he didn't want to take sides, but that I had forced him to. Since you can take sides with my father, my uncle is also sleeping with my wife. I don't want to think about it, but you have to be very invested in this for it to seem right. When the divorce papers were finally served, she tried to call me. She kept insisting. There were texts. She said she knew this was hard for me, but she hoped I could forgive her someday. They seem like a love story right now. A big, messed up, twisted, disgusting, rotten love story. At least they don't want to worry about me stopping the divorce. Now that everyone knows, I'm doing them a favor in some ways. But you know what's even worse? Staying married to that tarantula. My dad left a voicemail saying he still wanted to find a way to move forward. He said that no matter what happened, we were still family, and he refused to let this permanently separate us. I ignored the message without hearing the end of it. If my dad thinks we're going to be father and son again after this, that we're going to throw balls around in the backyard or have barbecues together, he's seriously mistaken. Update 3. I came home from work to Lucas's house and found a letter taped to the door. It was from my dad. He wrote that he didn't expect me to forgive him right away, but that he hoped we could talk like adults. He said he and my ex were considering a future together and wanted to do so with my blessing. He wrote that they would never be truly happy if they knew I was still out there, suffering, and that they needed family peace. I threw the letter in the trash after consulting with a lawyer, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. A week passed before I received another message, and this time it was from a distant cousin. She said she had met my dad and his new girlfriend at a restaurant downtown. She said they were laughing, holding hands, acting like a newlywed couple. My dad had introduced her by saying they were just grateful to be together. I don't think my cousin even knew she was my wife. She hadn't even been invited to my wedding because it was an intimate affair. That's why she wrote to me, to tell me about the extremely young girlfriend my father was dating. But now she knows. The problem is, she still hadn't told some people why we broke up. The next morning, I drafted a message. Just for the family and close friends, who told me they knew what really happened. I simply told the truth and sent it. Now it's out in the air, so to speak. Whoever needs to know will know. Update 4. It's been a month since I sent the message explaining everything. I got a month of silence from my father, as well as a month of quiet changes in my circle of friends, family, and acquaintances, which were reorganized based on what they now knew. And honestly, I didn't miss any of those who had been on my father's side. There weren't many, so it's no loss. What I did miss was my home. Not Lucas's house, for which I'm very grateful, but the house where I lived, the one I bought 5 years ago, the one I spent my weekends renovating, one project at a time, the one with the garden I planted, the patio I built, and the walls I painted with her back when I still thought love meant something permanent. When I left that night, the night they sat me down like it was a family reunion, and not a full-blown betrayal, I hadn't even packed a full suitcase. I just walked out, not trusting myself to stay calm if I spent one more minute inside that space. It was my house, bought in my name, with my money, my down payment, my everything. The only reason she was still comfortably there was because I hadn't claimed ownership. When we filed for divorce with my lawyer, I also asked him what was needed to secure the house for me. He asked me if I had any documents proving it was mine. I told him the house was purchased before the marriage. It had the mortgage, the title, and everything in my name. When we got married, she insisted on adding her name to the mailbox, not the deed, and I didn't think much of it. It seemed like a small thing to do at the time. She laughed and told me it would be a no-brainer. She sent her lawyer with questions, pleading emotional distress, saying she'd grown attached to the house and felt she was entitled to half of its value. My lawyer told her that feelings weren't what mattered here, but the legal documents were. There was no gray area, no shared ownership, nothing in her name, no payments made from her account. I was more generous than I liked, offering her 30 days to pack and move, but those are the legal requirements of my state. I told her through her lawyer that if anything in the house was missing or damaged, I would pursue it legally. She stopped worrying about the house. The house has been mine again for 2 weeks now, after this period has passed. And I'm so happy to have it back, even if it means taking it away from her and my father. It feels like a victory, even though I'm sleeping in another room and will probably sell it. But it was bought with my money, and I don't want her to continue enjoying it in any way. Update 5. The divorce lasted 6 months in total, from the time we filed the papers with my lawyer until the end. But the last few months were the most peaceful part of the whole mess. And when I finally had those papers in my hands, sealed, stamped, official, I sat in my car, in my driveway, and stared at them. 2 years of lies, 12 pages of rubbish. At least I've been able to keep many things from my marriage, including my money. And even though she hasn't worked, it's not my responsibility to compensate her for that. I don't think any judge could order spousal support for a wife like her. Now the house is for sale, and I'm going to move somewhere else as soon as I can sell it. I don't think living with the ghosts of my ex-wife and my father is the best thing for my sanity. I still don't hear much about my father and ex-wife, but I don't want to either, unless it's them getting some karma. If someone says they went on vacation to Hawaii, and a shark ripped out what was underneath them, then spit it out in front of my ex-wife because it tasted awful, I want to hear that. Well, maybe not all the details, of course. But if someone comes along and says they found them holding hands, I couldn't be less interested. Just to be clear, things about sharks, crocodiles, birds that have mistaken a worm, or bears with sharp claws, yes, romantic stuff, nothing. My mother said she's been thinking about this, and she says if my ex-wife had an affair with my father when they were married, it must have been more than 10 years ago. Which I thought too, but dismissed because my ex-wife would have been 15 at the time. I still don't know where my father knew her from before he met me, but that's about to change. I plan to find out. I'm being petty at this point, because if she was a minor, well, maybe there's something legal to do. What I do know is that there isn't much room for maneuver for them. I knew my ex when she was 20, so we're entering into a winding terrain if he knew her much earlier. You know, people say a lot, but it's actually a few months, and others say a lot, and it's 5 years. Update 6. I can now say what happened between my father and my ex-wife, at least in general terms. They met on a dating app when she was 18. There's a lot I don't know about it, because from what they've said, this app has an age filter. However, my father had to have set the bar at 18, and my ex-wife at my father's age to meet. Am I the only one who finds this disturbing? In any case, there was no age restriction. That relationship lasted about a year, until I met my wife through a mutual friend. A mutual friend just gave me this information. They also told me they reconnected a few months before telling me. My ex's excuse is that they tried hard not to for years, but his feelings were stronger. No one thought to tell me about their relationship when we started. I haven't been able to get my father's version of events, but I don't think it differs too much. I don't want to talk to him to find out. This alone is enough for me. Update 7. Now I don't know what's true and what's false, which is why I waited to do this update, so I could have all the details. Still, I still have my doubts. I think my friend, the one we had in common, told me the truth, but I don't think my ex told him the truth. This is what happened with my father. My father started a relationship with another woman at 21, but he also forgot to tell my ex, with whom he still had a love affair, butterflies, and fairies. Is he also in love with a 21-year-old? My ex found out, and when she did, she reported him because their relationship had begun when she was 17. I don't really know how they met, but that's the point. My father was doing something illegal because the age of consent in the state is 18. My father was going to get into a lot of legal trouble. In this state, there are sentences of up to 20 years. But my ex backed out at the last minute and said he was lying. By then, though, she'd already ruined my father's entire reputation, if he had any left. She made his new girlfriend leave him, got him fired from his job, and even my uncle, the same idiot who defended him, wouldn't speak to him. Plus, my ex also received a fine and community service for the false accusation. So I don't know what the truth is, if it was out of spite, and how they cheated on her. She lied. My ex-wife has ended up pretty badly after the divorce, because she hasn't gotten anything from me. For some reason, she wanted to end the marriage peacefully, so that I would leave her something, and she hasn't been well mentally since the divorce. Or maybe it was true, but she didn't want her lover to suffer and regretted it. But my father didn't regret breaking up with her after she ruined his life. There won't be a reconnection for a few years. I've always said I wanted to know things about my dad and my ex that had to do with sharks and other dangerous animals. But aren't lawyers considered sharks? So I guess this counts. And just as a side note, if I don't post again, my uncle has been trying to flirt with my ex. Now many things are understood. He also wanted to live with my father and date women younger than him. If possible, they should be within the family, for greater pleasure. I can't say I was angry. I've cut my uncle off since it all began, and if my ex likes to be passed around between brothers, that's her problem. I know she's rejected him, but you never know with my ex. It would be nice if that happened, and then she'd file a complaint against him like she did with my father. Tell me what you think about all this. What are your theories? Every time I think about it, I have a new one, but I also try to avoid thinking about it.